year, it's up about 46 students, or 46 FTEs, because of the third year of the rolling average. The first year of 4K, we had, let's say, 120 students, so we got 40 FTEs. The second year, we got 80 FTEs. Now this year, we'll get that full effect. So we take that number over, across, and I'm on the screen over here, and you start out with last year's per member, and then you look at what we're going to be allowed to increase. And I think very conservatively, it's either going to be a 0 or 100. I don't anticipate seeing a 200. I just, I don't, Cindy.
I have heard some rumblings about a negative. I'm hoping that's not the case, but I think preparing for no increase or $100 is.
And all I really want to show at this point in time is on this is that if we take that 9,500 times the 3,177 FTEs. Our total revenue limit then is $30,182,358. We will get some other exemptions, but they are not going to be really significant on this. So let's just take that number. If we take that number, that $30,182,000, you can equate this revenue limit minus equalized aid equals property tax. Our equalized aid, for every dollar we spend the previous year, we get about 70 cents to 75 cents on the dollar, and we talked about that a little bit earlier. So that's what helps us maintain that 31st lowest ranking that we have in the state of Wisconsin, because we're considered property poor in the state, where other districts that get less state aid are considered property rich. So that's why when they talk about these different resolutions, we want to be very careful about what we vote for and what we don't vote for, because there is only one pie when it comes right down to it. And every time you make changes to that system, it affects how much money the Toma school district gets, and that's what we're primarily concerned about now, until we see a funding formula that addresses all the issues. So we're going to transfer this number over to this next worksheet. Now, you don't have a copy of this worksheet over here. I'll try to increase the size, and part of that is because this worksheet's very fluid, and it can change quite significantly depending on what we're looking at. But we're going to focus on the 11 and 12 school year. And we'll look at this revenue cap. We have the same sheet over here. The number I'm circling right here is at 100, 0. So if I put in 0 on the revenue cap in 11 and 12, you can see that same $30,182,358, and that's just to show continuity between the two worksheets. So as we're taking a look at this now, we're going to transfer this into we're going to take a look at our revenues real quickly. Because our $30,182,000 is divided by our property tax. I don't like why that did that. Our property tax up here in Fund 10 at $8,976,000, and those are just estimates, not really worth a whole lot right now. Our state aid and our computer state aid, they will equal the $30,182,000, and they're estimated on there, and they'll change as that number changes. But the revenues that we need to be concerned about this year are our loss of stimulus dollars. We got those 2 years ago. We knew they would change, eventually go away, and they are going away this year. So as we look at that, we received about $394,536 this year in Title I RO money. We will not have that next year. Now, of that $394,000, not all of that do we have to recover in our budget. There's only about $221,000 or thereabouts that we'll have to find new dollars to pay for those positions that we kept last year. We also received a grant of about $66,000 of DARA funding for our buses. If you remember, we look back that we got to help replace our buses. That won't be there. And also we received $120,000 or approximately that for 4K funding. So we're going to have to make up that difference. You add all those things up right there, you're looking at $520,000 of revenue that we don't have. The flip side of that, as we'll look at as we go down the road, we received about $570,000 of jobs bill money from the federal government last year that we've been holding on to this year. So there should be an offset. But the following year, meaning the 12-13 year, we'll have to find monies to pick up those revenues, whatever we don't pick. And that's the funding cliff they talk about. We also see this in Fund 27. We have about $287,000 and then another additional $2271 in special education aid from the IDEA monies. Now, of that total, there only about $165,000 is dollars that we have to come up with. So that means between the $221,000 and $165,000, we're going to have to find approximately $380,000 of revenue to keep those positions, if we choose to keep them. That's kind of the revenue picture. That, I guess, would be the highlight. So if we move into the area of the expenses, again, we're looking at salary and fringes. Again, I put 3.8% in there as just a starting point. It's not a budget item. So if anybody asks you if that's a budget item, no. It's not a budget item. It's just to give us an idea where we would be at this point in time last year and the dollars we would need to find. So we look at our different revenues. Now keep in mind when you're working with percentages are very difficult because there are percentages are difficult because they apply a certain increase to every number. Okay, not all those numbers will see an increase. We will not be increasing our substitute pay by 3.8% unless there's a change here. You know, we will not be increasing some of our benefits payout by 3.8% here. So we have to look at some of these numbers in isolation. So my experience has been when you're using percentages, it tends to push that number up. And then also when we look at our grants that are valued at about close to $2 million, typically our grant revenues equal our grant expenditures, so that 3.8% isn't going to come off our Fund 10. That will be made up in the grant, so we don't have to worry about that increase. So you just have to be a little bit careful there. The other thing that we start to look at then is the non-salary side of things. And we've just estimated at 2%. And this is really a give or take because, a lot of our budgets, we haven't increased for many, many years. You know, if we look at administration, we look at curriculum, we look at technology, construction will go up or down, but that usually is based on the monies we have after we go through the budgeting process. We'll put in construction in order to get through the year. Like this year, we put an additional $168,000 in there, but also knowing that our gas bills could go up for our fuel for transportation, which we know is going up, our electric bill, and so forth and so on for any emergencies we have. So that's a little bit fluid. We have to take into account our open enrollment number, which can be difficult to estimate at this point in time. I've left those two numbers kind of where they're at. We'll need to look at our electricity bills. But having said all that, when it comes right down to it, then when you look at a 3.8% increase on the salary and fringes and an estimated 2% on the non-salary items, let's see if I can get to the bottom here, with a 0% or a $0 increase on the per student amount, we would be looking at about a $1.7 million deficit that we need to be funded. But now, having said that, keep in mind this is an estimate, and you got to really be careful with percentages. If we move this revenue cap number to let's just change this to a 100, and go back to that same expense number, everything stays equal except the $100. Now you're looking at a 1.3. So as I'm going out to buildings, and I should have it finalized where we're at, where I think we're going to be at, a little bit firmer number when I come back in February. Right now, this number will tend to trend lower than higher. And as I'm telling staff, I think our lowest reduction should somewhere be around $1 million and our highest potential around 1.5 that we might need to make up at this point in time. But again, I caution everybody when we're looking at that number because it's very preliminary. It's based on percentages. We don't know what the governor is or is not saying, but I think, as Cindy and I have discussed, we need to start preparing at this point in time for those numbers using the best information we have, and right now this is it. But again, I want to emphasize I would trend that number more towards $1 million to 1.5. Now I think, if you recall, I think last year when we were looking at this, when we got to the end of the process with the ARA monies, the removal of that before we were getting that jobs bill, we said we would probably have to cut another $1 million this year because so much money was being used through that ARA stimulus money. And I would anticipate, and this is very early, probably the same thing next year, depending on where this revenue limit goes. And it comes back to